Good afternoon, everybody. Well, we all know what has happened over the weekend and that we have lost our dear brother, Father Terry. At the moment we're trying to arrange his funeral, which under the COVID restrictions is going to be an extremely difficult affair. I hope we can do something that will enable everybody to have some part in the funeral liturgies and events in the first few days of half-term. Today, though, I just want to talk to you very personally about myself and Father, about our friendship and our love for each other. There'll be many people paying tributes to him, and rightly so, and have done already, warm and glowing tributes. This isn't a tribute, this is an account of a friendship and what it means. I first met Father 44 years ago, when he at that time was the parish priest of Stapleford. It was not a good time for priests. It was a great time for the church, full of excitement after the Vatican Council, everybody enthusiastic. But some of the clergy resented it, and they also resented each other. And I was completely shocked when I was first ordained at the behaviour of some priests to each other, and in particular to me personally. I think I've said before, I remember the first day I ever set foot in Hinckley here in the old church for the ordination of Father Michael Mason 40 years ago now. And I came into the church and a senior priest of the diocese came up to me and said, "I need to say something to you. You are a disgrace to the diocese." And I said, "I beg your pardon, you're a disgrace to the diocese." He said, "You're wearing brown shoes." And that was all those people thought about, what you wore, that you kept all the rules, followed everything that came out of Rome, and did as you were told. It was stifling and hurtful, and destroyed many of our dreams as to what our ministry might be. So along comes Father Terry, followed by Father Brian. I think the same about both of these men. In those days when I saw Terry, he was always affirming, is the word. He was always enthusiastic for you. He made you feel as if you meant something, that what you were doing was important, and that he appreciated it. And that's my first memory of him, the memory of his reassurance when everybody else or lots of other people were doing the opposite. That was the time when also I became very friendly with Father Brian, and his attitude is exactly the same, reassuring, friendly, and wise. And so years passed, and I would see Terry from time to time when I was in Derby and he was here. I was in Nottingham before, and then I came here in 2004. He was one of the first people to arrive on the doorstep. And he said to me, "I'm so pleased that you're here. I can't tell you how pleased I am. I'm so looking forward to us doing things together." And the reason he felt that was that he knew full well that both of us were of a similar mind. Our mind is that we're here to love our people, to make a family out of them, to show them the Lord's love at all times, and not to worry about too many other things, and certainly not to worry about ourselves. And he felt and I did as well, that we were kindred spirits in that. And so it was very, very kind of him and good of him, especially when I first came here and it was very difficult. I was grieving for the people I'd loved and served in Mickleover for 15 years and encountered a lot of nastiness from parishioners who just didn't want anything to change. Bishop Malcolm had a thick file of letters of complaint. And it was Terry at that time who reassured me, and he'd obviously survived quite a lot of that himself. And the same applied when we took over the responsibility for his 2 parishes while he was still there. He was always affirming and encouraging, even when opposition was at its worst, and believe me, it was at that time. These things should never take place, but they do. And his kindness and goodness to me, and he'd always tell you that you'd done well. He'd always tell you that he'd done well. There was no hint of competition or jealousy. If I managed to do something that was good, he'd say, "Oh, that was really good. Oh, it was so marvellous," And in all the years that I knew him, until relatively recently, every single time that I saw him, he said something nice. It was an amazing thing that this man could be so free of any jealousy or sense of competition, that he really was a true brother priest. And we had that wonderful friendship together, which I tried to repay in the last 4 years. I remember we used to have lots of jokes going up the A47, and he'd be giving out to me about some edict that came out from Rome. This has got nothing to do with anything. We'd have a kind of mutual moan. And then I discovered when he was 80, the parishioners took him to Rome as a treat. And I said to him, "You traitor." I said, "You are a traitor. You've betrayed me and our friendship by going to the very place that you never said you'd go in your life." And of course we had great fun about that. Great fun. Likewise, when one Sunday, just out of the blue here many years ago, it was the second Sunday of Advent, and we were told that John the Baptist came out of the wilderness. And I asked the people, I said, "Have you ever thought where the wilderness is?" I said, "It's somewhere around the back of Earl Shulton." So that got up the A47, and the reply was, "If you people in Hinckley want to know the truth of our faith, you need to be coming up here and staying well away from Hinckley." And of course, many people took us seriously, which made it even funnier. We had this joke for years, and I remember even when he was poorly, each night I always did the same thing, put my hand on his shoulder as he was in bed and said, "Good night, dear brother," to him, and "I'll see you tomorrow." And he'd say, "I might let you in," he said. And these were the wonderful kind of personal things between us that made life so good, so good. He was a legend in many ways, particularly in regard to the training of Eucharistic ministers. When he was taking part in that program all those years ago, there wasn't a single minister who didn't come back to me and say, "Oh, Father Terry gave us a talk and he had his rose and it was absolutely marvellous." And his contribution was legendary. It was just, everybody talked about it. It was a wonderful thing. It was always a wonderful thing. And then he came to retire, and he didn't want to retire. He was 85 and he had started to develop dementia. And it was very painful for him. There was a great constraint to make sure that he felt reassured. I always refer to him as the father of our community to his dying day. That wasn't just being patronising, it was telling the truth, because he was the father of our community. And even in his infirmity, I used to feel that he was watching over me. He was taking my back when things were hard. And that's what makes this loss so difficult. I feel really lost without him, without having that presence, even though I was looking after him. There was a sense in which he was still looking after me. He loved being with people, going out, even in his retirement, to restaurants or to people's homes, coming down to the Priory, going out with our lost group of old blokes, having his scampi and chips in one pub or other, and that gave him great happiness. Great happiness. And during the lockdown, it was the thing that, troubled him most, that he couldn't get out, he couldn't see more people. It was in his bones that he wanted to see his people, and for a long time that was restrained and restricted. It troubled him so much, it hurt him so much. And some days he'd just give out to me over coffee after Mass. We'd say Mass together every morning. And bless him, this is a sign of what sort of man he was, what a gentleman he was. He'd be giving out to me, and in the middle of the afternoon, a phone call, it's Terry here. I'm really sorry, I was a bit rotten to you today. He had the insight to think that he'd upset me. And I said to him, look, you've not upset me. I said, you're not cross with me, you're just cross with the situation. I'm just the one sitting in front of you. But he was such a gentleman and so thoughtful that if he'd ever thought that he'd hurt anybody, particularly me, he would, he'd ring up until fairly relatively recently. And then his condition progressed. I remember the day with Brian Underwood when we sat with him in Hinker Lodge and the consultant told him, you have Alzheimer's disease. And he didn't really understand what that was, but he was quite perturbed that they'd asked him these questions that he wasn't prepared for, like where he lived and all of that. And he found it difficult to remember. And the next time we went back, he said to the consultant, don't you be asking me those difficult questions again. So he obviously remembered that. But it didn't really sink in. What the prospect and the prognosis of that condition would be. Then started for me a daily involvement in his life. I used to go and see him every night. I have done for the last 3.5 years, and it's just been, the last few days have been terrible. 10 to 9 at night, my car is on its way up to Old Shulton to say goodnight to him. Even when I was teaching in Nottingham before lockdown and Derby, I would come back, it would be 10 o'clock. I'd sneak in if he was asleep, try and get his clothes out from under the bed without him waking up. And he'd say to me the next day, I knew you were here, my clothes were out. And that time has been very sacred. And during lockdown, it was twice a day, sometimes overnight. He was hospitalised for a little while, for 5 weeks there, early in just after his diagnosis. And I remember quite distinctly, it was a bizarre episode, sitting in the kitchen. I'd stayed with him for a month overnight, and then I got up one morning and he was in bed in what was the dining room next door, and I could hear him through the hatch. And I was writing the book at the time, which Spand have published, about caring for people with dementia and those who look after them, called Still the Same People. And I got to the bit, sometimes people who develop dementia don't understand what happened to them. Like something happened to the roof. And I just heard this voice coming out from next door. I don't understand this. I don't understand it. And it was like so spooky, so spooky. But we managed for quite some time, for a couple of years, to keep things on a level plateau. And that is down to the efforts of many people, particularly that small number of his caring team. Because in the book we were saying the most important thing is that you keep people going as long as possible. And so we try to keep things normal. We try to, take him out and he would go through the night without having to have anyone there. The care teams from Burbage Home Care, who we're very, very grateful to, would come in the morning and the evening. He would be dressed and washed when the carer came in the morning himself, and in the evening he'd usually be in bed, and there wasn't a huge amount for them to do, but just to make sure that everything was as it should be. And that went on then for quite some time until the lockdown, which caused his condition to change, I'm sure. And that's when the beginning of the end of his life approached. Many years ago, I promised him, I said, look, Terry, I'm your next of kin. I promise you, you will die in your own bed. And we went to the most extraordinary lengths to make sure that he could be in his own bed. We prayed that the Lord would take him in quietly in his own bed one night when he sleep, which thankfully happened in the end. But the prospect of him being in residential care was just not on the horizon. It couldn't be, because if he went into, residential care, then we would never see him again. And that was just too much to cope with. But the vagaries of dementia are that your condition changes. So Father's body clock reversed. He was very sleepy in the day and very agitated at night. That was quite challenging, and in the end I felt it was necessary just to leave him do what he needed to do. But the heartbreak of seeing this man of such intelligence, of wisdom and cheerfulness sort of disappearing in front of us. And it's strange, isn't it? I've written that book with Spand, and I've been involved with people who've got dementia for over 35 years, regularly in hospital, in their own home and so on. But the difference between that and actually caring for someone yourself every day is immense. Especially when you don't know how they're going to be, and you're trying to persuade them to eat and to drink and take the tablets, when you're trying to do things that they don't particularly want you to do, it's very painful. And when I think of people who do this for their husbands or wives or parents for prolonged periods of time, I'm even more full of admiration for them for what they've done. We were determined to keep that promise, and Father took his leave of us very quietly during the evening mass here last Saturday evening. I think it's important to say that nobody needs to be thanked. I don't, nor do any of the others. Because what was in us for him was our love, of course, not feigned, and our gratitude. And so there was no choice in doing what we did. There's no virtue in it, there's no reason to be, fawned over or whatever. We loved him. We could do no other than look after him. And that's why the whole is so big for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other people. We tried to keep this man's dignity and self-respect to the end. I always called him Father and made sure the carers did as well. In fact, when he first went to hospital, they put on the board Mr. Fellows, aka Father Terry, and I made him take it down. I said, this man has not been Mr. Fellows for 60 years. He is Father Terence Fellows. And you may put down Father Terence Fellows, aka Father Terry. You may not put down Mr. Fellows, because he isn't. And, while his mind was getting so confused, I wanted him to know that he was still our Father. We said Mass together, and, until the 1st of September, I used to ask him to lead it, and he would mumble his way through it, and he'd get upset if he'd kind of missed something. And we did it here in the church or in Old Shilton when we did the YouTube Mass. And again, I wanted him not to lose any sense of his priesthood. And even last week when, just before the end of his life, he was sitting next to me. We were saying Mass in our T-shirts in the living room in the presbytery. And he seemed to be asleep and he seemed to be out of it. But you could still hear the prayers. Jesus, Jesus, help me. It was just amazing. And I used to lift his arm. I said, Father, you need to bless me. And I used to lift his arm so that he could bless me and if anybody else happened to be there. So that to his dying day, he knew that he was still Father Terry. He was still the priest. And all those things that had galvanized him all his life, his concern for people, his love of the Lord, his love of the Eucharist in particular, had not gone. That was so important. Just before he died, Jim was with him and a few other people and read Cardinal Newman's prayer to Terry. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. If I am in my perplexity may serve him. Here is a man who, in his sickness and in his perplexity, never failed to serve the Lord. Never failed. He used to love it when Roger, his favourite carer, would read something from the Bible to him or some book that he was trying to think about. And Roger would sit there after his time was over and read to Father. He used to love that. He used to love that stimulation that was still there. And he was literally Father Terry to his dying day. Last Saturday evening when everyone had gone, I sat with him for a couple of hours and pottered around his room trying to tidy things up and looked at him dead in the bed, was talking to him, and no reply, of course. It was a very lonely experience, but it was very special. And when they came from our friends' cellars to take him out of his home for the last time, I helped them. I wrapped him in the shroud and put him on the trolley and loaded him into the van to say goodbye. And I stripped his bed and put his sheets and everything and his clothes in the washing machine to be dealt with later. And at 11:15 I came out and locked the door on the presbytery. And that was very difficult. Because I knew that the next time I went in there, it would never be the same again. So that's just some of my story. You've all got stories and your own personal reasons to be grateful to Father. But we have lost someone and something so special, and I don't think we really realize it. He has had all the love that I could give him, especially these last 3.5 years, to the point that it has been instinctive. And that's what priests should do for each other. We look after our people, we look after each other, we support each other, we encourage each other, sometimes we correct each other, rightly so. But that's what we do. That's what being a priest is now. And only another priest will really understand that fully, just as only you, many of you as married people, will understand what being married is, and I can't possibly understand that. It's just something very special. And no thanks are necessary at all. What I would say to him is what my Italian friends say to me sometimes when you do something nice. They say prego, which means you're very welcome. Terry, you're very welcome.